Hi, welcome to the podcast. It's just me today, Amy. Christy is out working. So, welcome to Southern Sober and Sassy. So glad you're here. It's just me, and Tico may linger on. My four-legged nephew, he may come in the podcast at times just to check things out. So, thank you for joining today. And I thought this was a great topic. I was listening to Dr. Dawn Elise Snipes. It's Doc Snipes. She does a podcast, Counselor Toolbox podcast, and she did an episode in December 24th of 2024. That's when it posted, and it was the surprising connection between adverse childhood experiences and intergenerational trauma. Wow. And she goes on to say in the podcast, she says, trauma can occur in all pieces of life, and it's important that we recognize that trauma is anything that happens that leaves us feeling unsafe and powerless. We can experience traumas and resolve our traumas and move on. That's what we call traumatic growth. So how many of you today that are listening or watching, how many have commas in their traumas? How many of you have more than one trauma? Well, for me, I had a handful and a half. And when they went unresolved for a long time, that led to me finding relief in drinking and drugging. That was my go-to. Anytime anybody ever spoke to me about anything and I didn't like, that defiancy, I'd go drink or drug. Anytime anybody wanted to have a discussion with me, I always thought, why are you coming at me like this? My defense was always heightened, especially in active addiction, because I thought it was always going to be an argument. I didn't really understand about a compassionate conversation and didn't understand that we can communicate without chaos, because growing up, that's most of what my communication looked like. It was always, my way or the highway. I was defiant as a young child. I was raised Southern Baptist, and I'm here today, and I'm grateful for God's grace, and that's the past, and I've worked through it. But it doesn't mean that it didn't have an effect on me, and it doesn't mean it didn't have an effect on my own parenting skills as a parent. And unfortunately for my girls, most of their life, I was in active addiction. I got sober when they were 17 and 9, and I believe I've shared that with you before, but I went back and found a blog that I had written, and it was called I Am a Survivor. And the phrase that's used in many songs, positive quotes, terms for illness and remission, and referencing strength after struggles. My youngest daughter had given me a bracelet, and in the inscription on the inside said, I am a survivor. It was so dainty and simple, and I was shocked that she got it for me. Well, I really wasn't shocked. She loves giving gifts. She recently had taken her sister a shirt that resembled her sister's dog. So, she has a big heart, and she enjoys getting things for people. She also likes receiving. What girl doesn't? So I am grateful, and I wrote this in the blog. I said, I'm grateful because I believe this bracelet has huge significance in our relationship, as it was a turning point in our communication with one another. Because I had shared with her just things that happened that were relevant to our conversation that happened in my childhood. And, she shared with me her anger and resentment. She also shared, with me her frustration. And I was able to go back and commit and communicate. Now, this was back in 2000, and I think it was 18 that I did. It was Mother's Day 2018 I got this bracelet. So I was very grateful, like I said, and it was a turning point in our relationship. I will tell you that when that quote says the topic of the podcast was adverse childhood experiences and intergenerational trauma. So my trauma had commas. And I brought my traumas into my parenting skills, unfortunately, which the skills were nil for a long time in active addiction. But as the years are coming and going and I'm staying sober, I'm learning how to communicate without the chaos and communicate compassionately. Why? Because I have less commas naming my traumas as of today. How did I do that? I did the work. I did the work. What worked for me is the shame that binds us. What worked for me is my meetings and my support. What worked for me was continuing to know and be able to forgive. And forgiveness is always for us. It's not for them. It's for us. Because if we cannot let go, how are we going to be able to have space for the good? If our brains, our minds, and our hearts and our gut is full of anger, full of shame, is full of just even fear, we don't have room for that peace, hope, and joy. So I had to remove the trauma. I had to remove the shame, had to remove the anger and the fear. Now, when I say remove trauma, let me explain what I mean by that. Removing trauma is to where I was able to healthy, productively, and be able to process the trauma, look at it from all sides, and be able to let go and recognize that trauma in my life was not necessarily something I could even control. But as an adult, I get the opportunity to heal from it. And that's what I do on a daily basis. We are always growing in recovery. You know, it's about progress, not perfection. And something that stood out to me about the definition when she said about trauma, she said trauma can occur in all pieces of life. And it's important that we recognize the trauma is that anything that leaves us feeling unsafe and powerless. Even after getting sober, there are things in my life that I was powerless over. And if I didn't recognize it, it became infested in me. Like the perfectionist or the overachiever wanted to fix it, wanted to be powerful over it, whether it be relationships, whether it be control over other people, whether it be job or working with other people. It didn't matter. If I was powerless, I felt like I had failed because I grew up being the overachiever and the perfectionist. And so today I recognize that my trauma does not have to have commas. I do not have to hold on. I can let go of traumas in my life. And so when I tell you that, I think that for me, when I felt anger and when I felt trauma, I was usually defensive, I was angry, I was miserable, and I isolated. And so today, working on communication, having compassionate communication, I have tools now. And one of those tools is I'm able to communicate how I feel and more importantly, what I need. Not what I want, but what I need, which I think is very important, especially in recovery, because if we do not work on the shame that binds us, we're not going to be able to ask for help. So working through that shame has pulled me out of isolation, and it's part of my recovery journey. So that's about it for me. I really appreciate you all listening, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead. It's Super Bowl weekend, so whomever you're rooting for, good luck to them and Godspeed to both teams. And Christy will be back with us next week, okay? Have a great day. Bye.